Well, we're in this series called Leaving a Legacy. I've been talking to you about this for the last couple of weeks, and last week we talked about the greatest gift that we give to our community is the invitation to community. And I think that is one of the things that the church, when the church is healthy, the church does community really well, unlike most places. In fact, some of us have said things along the lines of my church family is an extension of my family. The relationships that we build, and I certainly can see that. You know, people will ask me, is it hard being away or being so far away from your parents? My mom and dad are in New Jersey. And I say, yeah, it is. And it's also not, because so many people, so many of you are an extension of our family. And we're so grateful for that. It's really a wonderful thing. And today, I want to conclude this series by talking about the last facet of leaving a legacy. I've told you a story in the past. I remember when I was in college, I drove a 79 Oldsmobile Delta 88. It had red plush interior. This thing was like driving around on your living room couch. It was fantastic. And it was a boat. And it ate gas like no other, but it was mine, and I only paid $1 for it. And so I really loved that car. You always have some weird affection for your first vehicle, even if it's a jalopy. Do you all use that word in the Midwest, jalopy? All right. So anyway, I remember coming home one day, and my grandfather, some of you have heard this story. I was home from college, and my grandfather called me and said, "Hey, son, let's go have breakfast this Saturday, and if you don't mind, I'd like to borrow your car." And I'm thinking to myself, you're a retired executive from Exxon. What in the world do you need with my car? Right? Well, little did I know, we went to have breakfast, and I lent him my car, and later on that day, around 7 o'clock, he called me, and he came and picked me up in my car, and he said, "Just drop me off, bring me back home." And as I was dropping him off, he handed me an envelope, and he said, "Just put that in the glove box." And I said, "Okay." And as I pulled away, I opened it up, and there was all this work that he had done to my car. New tires, oil change, and of course, I'm a college student, right? And college students are not usually well-to-do, and I certainly was not. And so he had given me this gift, and I can tell you so many stories like that in my family and with folks that have just been really so generous. And there is this principle of generosity when it comes to leaving a legacy. And it may not always be money, but it could be time spent, and it could be relationships that are built. But today, I do want to talk to you about the topic of generosity, and I want to look at it from the perspective of money. And before you shut me down on this, just give me a chance to redeem a topic that I think has been used and misused when it comes to the church. We have seen the best of this, and unfortunately, you don't have to turn on late-night TV without seeing the worst of it when it comes to money in the name of Jesus. And so I'm going to try today, as best as I can, to redeem this topic and present it to you in a way that is life-giving, because I think it's important. And the reason why we talk about it, and the reason why this is important, is because I care about your heart. I care about your heart. And if I care about your heart, then I have to take this verse seriously. This is what Jesus says: "Where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also." Essentially what he's saying is, where you put your resources is a good indicator of where your priorities are and where your heart is. And I certainly think that is true. We're talking about this because it's a heart matter. And here's the thing. Oftentimes I have the opportunity to counsel couples who are in crisis. Sometimes they're on the verge of calling it quits, or sometimes they're separated. And I have to tell you that 9 times out of 10, when I deal with a couple that gets to that place, it's not every single one, but the vast majority of them have come to a separating of their ways around 2 issues: communication and money. And actually, it's the money thing that led to the communication issue and the fighting, and that's just so often the case. And I think to myself, well, why don't we talk about this more? Well, we don't talk about it because we've seen the worst of communication when it comes to this, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. And I think when it comes to money, we think, well, the church just wants my money. Or God, God just wants my money. And I just want to say something to you, and for some of you, this may be the only thing you needed to hear today. God does not want to get your money, but he'd like to keep your money from getting you. God does not want to get your money, but he'd like to keep your money from getting you. Have you ever met somebody whose money got them? Had them trapped. Had them in a place that wasn't healthy. You knew it. The people around them knew it, and they didn't know it. And so if that's the case, how do we talk about this? So I want to talk about two things today. I want to talk about stewardship, which is a word that we hear around the church. And I want to talk about generosity. And I want you to see this. Stewardship is how we manage the money, right? You are stewards of the resources that God has given to you. Your physical resources, your spiritual resources, your emotional resources. We manage those things. All of us are stewards of things that have been entrusted to us. Stewardship is money managed. Generosity is money given. Stewardship is money managed. Generosity is money given. There was a British sculptor by the name of Sir Jacob Epstein. He was once visited in his studio by the eminent author and fellow Brit, George Bernard Shaw. Anybody know that name, George Bernard Shaw? And the visitor noticed a huge block of stone standing in one corner and asked what it was for. "I don't know yet," Epstein said. "I'm still making plans." Shaw was astounded. "You mean you plan your work?" He said, "I change my mind several times a day." To which the sculptor responded, "That's all very well with a 4-ounce manuscript, but not with a 4-ton piece of block." And I thought, what a great illustration of stewardship. I love what Isaiah in the Old Testament says. That's the first half of the Bible. He was a prophet that foretold the coming of Jesus. But this is what he says about generous people. He says, generous people plan to do what is generous. Let's say that again. What do generous people do? They plan to do what is generous. And here's what I have found, particularly when it comes to our resources, any of them, but in this case, what we do with our financial resources, failure to plan is planning to fail, right? Failure to plan is planning to fail. In fact, a budget is a plan that tells your money where it's going. Because here's what I have found, and maybe it's been true for you. If you don't tell your money where it's going, your money will tell you where it's going. And by the time it gets to the place where it's not where you'd have it to be, it's probably too late, right? And so what does the Bible say? It says that generous people stand firm in their generosity. They stand firm. They plan it. And most of us, what do we plan when it comes to our money? Well, we plan to spend it. Or we plan to consume it. And so the first thing I want to encourage you to do, if you're going to leave a legacy, and your generosity plays into that, is the first thing we ought to do is we ought to commit to plan, and we ought to be prepared. Can I tell you something I found to be true in so many cases? Oftentimes, people have enough money. They're just not sure where their money's going. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with people and talked this through with them. I said, the problem is you just don't know where it's going because you don't have a plan. And a spending plan is to tell your money where it's going to go so your money doesn't tell you. We have one of those here at church. Early on in our marriage, we realized the power of having a budget, the power of having a plan. We realized it was not about not having enough. It was we just didn't know where it was going. Because if you don't lead your money will lead you. Here's the second thing. We practice generosity. There's so many examples of generosity, even sacrificial generosity in the scriptures. We do this as a church, too. Do you know nearly every request that came in this Christmas for people that needed help, we fulfilled those requests. You know why we were able to do that? Because we planned what we were going to do with the money when it came in, and we set it aside, and we said it's only going to be used for this. And when we needed it, it was there. It was there. I'll share a statistic with you that should be exciting to you. Many of you know Shalom went through a difficult season. There was a strong reality at one time that we weren't sure how long Shalom would be able to keep its doors open. I mean, that's the truth. It got tough for a while. We just had a board meeting this last week, and I want to say this to you. Right now, there's just shy of $200,000 set aside in the bank. We're not living week to week. We're planning what to do with those resources. We're building funds so that in the case of a rainy day in the future, we're ready for that. Those things are important. Now, when I tell you that number, please don't turn to your spouse and go, hold your offering today. They don't need it. Because that's not the case. It's not the case at all. In fact, if those funds weren't there last year, we would have had a hard time with certain things. So that's all very helpful. And I just say that to you to say, we're thinking about this here as a church. You ought to think about it too. To me, there's no more powerful story than a story that Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, told in the 12th chapter of his Gospel about Jesus watching what people gave. And this is how Mark told the story. He said, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were being put, and he watched the crowd put their money into the temple treasury. I mean, now you have to think to yourself, if that were to happen today, this would be weird. Like if when the offering came around later on in the service, Jesus was the one taking the offering, would that be a little like, whoa? Right? But it's almost creepy, but that's what's happening. He's sitting down and he's watching what they're doing because he knows that what they're doing is a reflection of what's going on in their hearts. Jesus is watching what people put in the offering bucket, and Mark said that many of the rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came along and she had 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. And calling his disciples together, Jesus said this is so powerful. This is what he said. Truly, this poor widow, this woman who would have been living off the scraps of other people, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all of the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all that she had to live on. And what's interesting to me about this is that, first of all, Jesus was watching. And second thing that's interesting to me is he didn't stop her. He didn't go to her and say, hey, listen, that's a lot for you. Don't do that. I mean, if I'm a pastor on duty that day, I'm probably like, listen, don't worry about it. It's covered. The folks that have more resources, they've got it covered. You need to live off of that. And here's the thing. Jesus did not rob her of the blessing of giving. He celebrated her sacrificial gift. And then he goes right on, he says, she's actually given more than everybody else. You know why? Because it cost her. And here's what we learn. We learn a principle in that. It's unequal gifts, but equal sacrifice. It's unequal gifts. And you might say, well, what is this? What does my little bit mean? Every penny has significance when the heart is one of sacrifice. I'm going to tell you a story without getting overly emotional about an incident that helped move our standard of living as a family, personally, to a whole new level. It started long before I was married. It actually started when I was about 14 years old. I had gone on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic, and I had joined about 100 students from around the country in the denomination I grew up in, and we were told we were going to be broken off into 4 groups, and we were going to build churches in some of the most impoverished areas of the country. And so where we would be put that day is in a little community called La Vega, a barrio in the Dominican Republic without very much, not even running water to speak of. And I remember showing up there, and we had to dig the footings, the foundation of this whole thing by hand. And every day, this little old lady would come out of her house, and she would sit at the corner of the project site, and she would just sit, and she would go like this with a smile on her face. Well, I had purposed that year to take first-year Spanish because I wanted to communicate. My Spanish was not the best, but I walked up to her, and I said hello, and she kept saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. And she said, estamos orando por una iglesia en este país. And what she was saying was, we've been praying for a church in this place. This village has been praying. You're an answer to our prayers. And we kept building and building. And when that church was done, she came to the dedication, tears streaming down her face. And every day throughout the course of that week, I had gone and I had talked to her. Well, we were told when we got there not to eat or drink anything that was given to us because you just didn't know the condition of the water and things like that. Well, this lady comes up to me and puts her hand in my hand and motions me and says to me, please come to my home. I want to feed you. Oh boy. So I go to the head of the group and I said, listen, I have talked to this lady every day. Please, can I go? And he said, you can go. And there's a few of us that when he goes, but it's at your own risk. Just know that. Well, we went. And she had taken everything out of her cupboards and made this meal. And we ate. And that, I will tell you, was the gift that kept on giving for a few months. But I realized she emptied her pantry. And I immediately walked away, and I've thought ever since that day, God, make me more like that. I want to tell you a really, really cool story. So when I got to the bridge in New York, we were a very multi-ethnic church. 46 different nationalities represented in our church, 9 languages that we knew of. And I told this story. And a woman came up to me, tears streaming down her face after the service. And she was crying, saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. She said, I grew up in that village. I was a little girl when you were building that church. And I know the lady that sat there at the corner and prayed. She was an elder in the village. And she said, after you all left and that church opened, within a year, they had 5 services. They could not fit everybody. God, make me more like that. I just want to ask you, when's the last time that you've received the blessing of practicing generosity? When's the last time you've given in such a way that you felt it and you loved that you gave something up to be a blessing to somebody else? See, this is what we do. This is what we do. And I want to be clear for a minute. I'm going to ask you to be generous. I'm just going to ask you. I'm going to ask you to be generous. I'm going to ask you to give generously to what God is doing here. And listen, if you don't believe me in this, or if you don't believe this, or you don't believe us, or whatever, don't give here. But find a church where you can live out your faith unencumbered. Because generosity unlocks blessings in your life. I can't explain the whole principle, but when you practice generosity, something unlocks in you. And I've seen it over and over and over again. Make the decision that you're going to go from being a consumer to being a contributor. We believe that this is a church that Christ died for, that Christ will return for. And you ought to plug into it and invest your time, your talents, your resources, your finances, to be a giver as a Jesus follower. Because I know we can impact the world through this body of Christ. Give somewhere. If it's not here, find a place, please. I can even help you if this isn't the right place, but get involved. Get plugged in. Invest yourself. I've told you what we do, but let me tell you for a minute what we don't do. And I just want to be really clear as a church, and those of you who have been here with me since I came back in December, you know this to be true. We don't pass the bucket or the plate multiple times every week. We simply invite people to practice generosity. Taking special offerings has been a rare exception. here, especially since we made that commitment. I attended a church where they would come by once and there'd be a need, they'd come by again, then they'd come by again. Wouldn't it be great if any time there was a tremendous need around us, we would have already cut a check, ready to meet that need? Let me tell you what we do. I will, as one of your pastors, inspire you and challenge you to give without apologizing. But I promise you, I will never ask you to do something that I am unwilling to do or that my family is not willing to do. I promise you that. I'll inspire you to give because we truly believe it is more blessed to give than to receive. It's part of our legacy. This last week, I ran into one of the guys that comes to AA here at Shalom. I don't know if you knew that on Tuesday nights, we have AA and Al-Anon. And I was on my way to my car, and I realized I forgot something in the building, so I came back in really quick, and I saw the guys in the kitchen wrapping up, and I peeked my head, and I said, "Hey, guys, have a great day." And he goes, "Hey, whoa, wait a minute." And I don't even think he's 30. He said, "What's going on in this place?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I don't know if you realize this, but everywhere I go in this community, all I hear about is shalom, shalom, shalom." I said, "I hope that's a good thing." He goes, "No, it's a great thing. Everybody's talking about you guys." He said, "I'm coming. I have to come and see what's going on." I said, "That's a fantastic problem." I walked out the door. I said, "Yes." You can't pay for that. But that's what's happening. And with God's help, we'll act wisely and prayerfully steward the resources that are given. And when you give, we'll use it to make a difference. And we'll manage it with the utmost of integrity. And we'll give to churches and we'll give to other people in need. And we'll start missional experiences and incarnational experiences and churches that help people love God, love others, and serve the world. This is what drives us. This is our blessing. This past year, so many people said to me, "Dan, we want to be a blessing to Shalom," and a blessing you have been. See, this is what we do. At Shalom, we look for opportunities to practice generosity. And so the question that I have for you in this, when you consider your legacy, the legacy you're leaving, and the legacy we're leaving, is, are you a part of we?